Hey friends, welcome back to another video. My name's Emma LaFave, and this week we're working on a 3-part video series where I'm going to show you how to paint both of these landscapes in sections depending on which techniques we're going to be using. So a little while back I did a few technique videos where I showed you the most important techniques that you need to know when you're beginning with watercolor, and this series is just breaking down them in a bit more of a detailed way and going through how you would use them in 2 different landscape paintings. So today we are starting with just the background, learning how to use a gradient as well as a multicolor gradient and blending technique, as well as a bit of wet on wet. So let's jump in and get started with our first video. Okay, so for our first video in this series, we're going to be working on backgrounds for landscapes. And there's a couple techniques that I want to show you that are going to be really important when creating any kind of landscape background. And they are gradients and then the wet on wet technique. So I have I think this is Saunders Waterford watercolor paper. This is a block of it and it is 12 by 9 inches. And I just put some painter's tape down the middle because I'm going to show you 2 different background techniques, and then we will kind of go off of these paintings in the next few videos, creating, you know, more full landscapes using the next techniques. So I just used some painter's tape just to tape it down the middle. If you do not have a block of paper, and if you don't know what a block is when the paper is all glued down on all sides except for one little area, and that is where you remove the paper. And the reason why they have paper blocks like these and pads, the block will actually keep your paper flat during a painting, especially when you're using a lot of water. If you have painted with watercolor before, you know that when you use a lot of water, your paper tends to warp and kind of buckle. Having a block of watercolor paper prevents that from happening. You just have to wait for it to fully dry before you remove it from your block. And usually what I do just to remove it, I'll take like a ruler and I'll put it in the slot and I'll just gently remove the edges. But if you have a paper or a sketchbook, what I would suggest with these landscapes is using some painter's tape, which I just got from the dollar store, and taping down all the sides so it doesn't buckle and warp too much during your painting, because we are going to be using a lot of water. Okay, so that is the paper I'm using, and this is cold press paper, which I find works the best. Hot press paper tends to be a bit more smooth, a little bit harder to do wet on wet techniques. So cold paper I always suggest, and then 100% cotton is like premium watercolor paper that always works best. But use whatever you have, practice with these techniques, and yeah. So the paint that I'm using is the paint from my Ultimate palette. I did a video filling this all up, and all the paint colors are listed in the description. You do not need to have all of these paints colors. You don't. And I will say that over and over again. I do because this is my job, but you do not need to have this. Work with whatever you have. Work with similar colors if you'd like, or just go on your own color palette. That works totally fine. And then for brushes, you are going to want to have a brush that can carry a decent amount of water to do the backgrounds. So there are a few options. You could always grab a brush that's like a flat brush like this, which will cover a large space. Or if you have one of those soft kind of squirrel hair brushes, I think this is synthetic. I don't think it's a real squirrel hair, but these brushes tend to hold a lot of water, which is great for creating backgrounds because you can cover a lot more surface area with a brush that holds a lot of water. You do not want to be doing this with a smaller brush because we are going to be covering the whole side. What will happen is this will take a lot of time to lay all that water down, and then once you go back in to do the wet on wet technique, parts of your paper are going to be dry. So you want a fairly large brush. It doesn't have to be huge. You can use a flat brush, or if you have maybe even a larger, like size 12 or size 14 round brush. Like I said, if you have one of these like kind of mop brushes, or even like an actual mop brush, that works. And that's just to kind of lay down the color. Once we start doing a little bit more of the technique, you are going to want a smaller brush, like a size 10 or a size 6, and that will work well. Okay, so now that we know what materials we have, we also have water jars, paper towel, and if you'd like to wet up your paints beforehand, you can grab a spray bottle or just dip your paintbrush in your water and then put it in your paint, and that also activates it as well. Okay. So now we're going to get into the techniques for today's video. I'm going to be showing you 2 different techniques for backgrounds. So one is a gradient, which is when you have a dark value of a color, and a value refers to the darkness or lightness of a color. And that depends on how much paint to water ratio you have on your brush. The more paint you have on your brush, the darker the value is going to be. The more water you use to dilute that paint, the lighter the value is going to be. And in a lot of skies in our landscapes, we usually try and do a gradient from dark to light. If you look at landscape portraits or photography, you'll see it tends to be darker at the top and then lighter towards the horizon line. So we're going to be working on a gradient, and we're also going to be working on a like multicolor gradient, kind of working from one color to the next. Okay, so here I'm going to do a single color gradient, like a blue sky. We're going to work on that for one painting, and then the next one's going to be more of like a sunset. So the way I find that works the best when you're doing this is wetting up the whole area that you're about to paint. It just helps the paint flow a bit better rather than just laying like the blue on to start and then dragging it down. It just helps it, you know, just a little bit better. So if you want to take a pencil and just kind of create your, I don't know where my pencils are. If you want to create a pencil, get a pencil and create like a horizon line. You can definitely do that. I'm just gonna wing it. Okay, and I'm just gonna take my flat wash brush and I'm just going to add water to the background of my paper. And I'm just going to go about halfway. I'm trying to think of, I think this one, maybe we'll do some water painting. Actually, you know what? We're going to create a gradient on the whole thing. The whole thing. So this is also why you need a decent size brush to get water all over your painting. And when you're doing this, you want enough water to cover the area so that if you were to tilt it, there's kind of like the shine to the background. But you don't want so much water that it's going to drip everywhere. So if I tilt this, can you see kind of like that glare there, that glare on the page? That's what you want. But also you can see there's kind of like a little bit of a puddle there. So I'm just going to try and move it so it's all evenly wet. This way, if you look at that glare, you can also see if there's any dry spots that you need to get. Okay, you just want to keep it wet. Okay, then you're going to choose your sky color. I would have it prepared beforehand. So you're not wasting time and then this will dry. So I'm going to grab this color. I don't even know what color this is. Phthalo Blue. And I'm going to swish my brush around in my paint and I'm going to apply it to the top and see how dark that is. It's because I took quite a lot of the paint. Okay, there's more paint than water on my brush, and I'm just going to slowly start moving it down. And the more I move down, the lighter it's starting to get because the paint is kind of running out on my brush. So I'm naturally getting that gradient. Okay, so I'm just slowly moving it down. And we want it lighter towards that horizon line. Okay, and I'm just moving it back up. Okay. Now, if you find that too much of that dark color is moving on down, you can always wash off your brush, tap it on your paper towel. Tap it on your paper towel is important because you want to take off any of that excess water and then continue to move it down. Okay, if you don't take off that excess water, when you apply your brush with water back, I'll show you what happens. Okay, you have too much water on your brush. Look at that line you get. That means there's too much water on your brush. So what the water actually does is it repels the paint and moves it away. So that's why you want to tap that excess water on your paper towel before you apply it to your paper, your paper, so you don't get that line. Now, if this happens, that's okay. We can just grab some more paint. I'm going to make this darker up here anyway, and continue to bring it down. You want a nice smooth gradient. Okay, just going back and forth. Nice and smooth. And my elbow is kind of like off my table. You can't really see. And I'm just moving my whole arm back and forth like this. Okay, so let's say my horizon line is about here. I need a little bit more paint up here. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing bottom up. Okay, because I want it to be kind of like a reflection, I think, in the water. Do I want to do a different color for the water? No, I don't think so. I think it's going to be like a reflection. Okay, hopefully, yeah, this is still fairly wet. Actually, it's not that wet. It's a little bit more dry, but I'm still going to move it. Okay, doing the same thing just from the bottom up. If you need to re-wet your paper down below, you can definitely do that. See how it's dry? And it's a little bit harder to move up. It just flows a bit better when it's wet. But I'm just going to add a little bit of water to my brush, just a tiny bit. Try and grab some of this paint. Continue to move it up. And I want it fairly light, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water, not really any paint. And just try and bring some of that light color up. Okay, I'm going to do it again because I need a bit more paint. Start nice and dark down here. And then start to move it up to meet that horizon line. And I'm going to leave a little bit of white space in between. Okay. I'm just kind of going back down. Just trying to get it nice and smooth. Now remember, this takes practice. Your gradient may not be perfectly smooth, also depending on what paper you're using. If you're brand new to this, lots of factors have a lot to do with that, okay? So don't be so hard on yourself if it doesn't work completely well. Paper is a huge part of this, so just keep that in mind, but this is something to practice, okay? So there is your gradient from dark to light and then light to dark. And this is going to be kind of like our ocean water scene, which we are going to expand on with this series. So that's our first painting for this landscape. Now, one thing you could do if you wanted to, there's another technique called lifting, which if you wanted to create some clouds or something, you could do. I don't know if this is, yeah, this is still a little bit wet. So I'm going to show you this quick technique that we're going to add into this painting. I'm going to take my paper towel, and this is how I create clouds. So I'm just going to kind of stick my finger like this to create kind of like a circle. I'm going to hold it like that, and I'm just going to dab and lift some of that color to create clouds. If you want, you don't have to do this. I just thought it would be a bonus technique to kind of show you. And I'm creating the clouds a bit lower in the sky. Like that. Just dabbing. Now some of it is kind of fading back, like it's not being completely white because it's still a little wet, but that's fine. And I might create some like flatter clouds. I'm just gonna kind of create an edge here with my paper towel that are a little bit flatter. You can't really see too much. More in the distance. And that's just another kind of little technique that you can use. Now I'm not going to do it too much down here. Should I do it down there? Because this is going to be the reflection in the water. Maybe I'll do a little bit. I don't want it to be too... I don't know if I want to do that. I'm going to dry off my brush, make sure it's nice and dry, and just kind of go back over it. No, I don't think we're going to do it in the reflection. Okay, so we're going to leave that one before I ruin it. But there is our first background using the gradient technique as well as a little bit of our lifting technique for the clouds, okay? Okay, so that's our first painting. Let's let this one dry and then we'll come back and do our second. Okay, so now we can move on to our second, and I just wanted to wait for that to dry so I can lay this on top. Okay, so now for our second painting, we are going to do more of like a sunset sky, and then we're going to have grass down here. So I'm going to show you how to do a gradient, kind of going from multiple colors to our horizon line, and then we're going to do that gradient of the green grass up to the horizon line. So pick your colors for your sunset if you'd like to do something different than mine. And I'm going to be doing yellow closest to the horizon line into kind of like an orangey pink, pink into like a bluish purple. Okay, so have those colors kind of prepared if you want to follow along. And we're just going to wet from our horizon line, so like the center of the paper, or even a little bit further. If you want more sky in it, maybe you'll have a bit more sky upwards. So you're just going to, again, wetting. Just I find it's the easiest way to kind of get a nice smooth blend from color to color if it's wet in the background. Again, you can look at or tilt your paper so you can see that glare, see it? See if there's any dry spots over here. I can see it's a little bit more dry. I'm going to add a bit more water. And this just helps keep the paper all the same amount of wetness when you're doing it. Gives you an idea of where it's more wet, where it's more dry, because that's what helps keep the gradient smooth and even, is when it's all the same amount of wetness. When you have an area that's more wet than another, that's when you get weird kind of marks and blooms and all that stuff. Okay, so it's all wet. And I'm going to start with some cadmium yellow right here. And I'm just going to start by going back and forth, bringing it up a bit. Okay, so I want it most yellow right here. And then I'm going to start bringing it up. Okay, then I'm going to grab some pink. And I'm just going to put it on my palette a bit. And I'm going to go a little bit further up. And then I'm going to try and bring it down to meet the yellow a bit. And that will create kind of like an orangey mix, orange blend. Okay. Going from pink here, just bringing it down to an orange blend. I'm actually going to change my brush out to a size 12 round. Gives me a little bit of a better hold. Okay. For this. Now you don't want, again, too much water because then it's going to repel the color. That feels better. Okay, so you see that orange? Now if the orange is coming down too much and you get the stark line, wash off your brush, dry it on your paper towel, then go over that line and blend it out. Okay, drying it on your paper towel is key because it's going to push that pigment away and you're going to get a line. Okay, now I'm just going to bring this pink up a bit more because we're going to blend it into our next color, which is going to be blue, and it's going to create kind of like a purple. Okay, we want this all fairly wet because we're going to create some darker clouds. Let's use the same blue that we had. Okay, and I'm going to start from the top. And I'm going to start to bring it down. If too much blue is being brought down, it's like too blue, you can always wash off your brush, dry it, and blend it out. Now I'm going to wash it off, dry it a bit, blend it out right there. Okay, and there is our kind of gradient from one color to the next. Now, I want to start creating some darker clouds in these colors. So I'm going to make sure it's all still wet. I just washed off my brush. Okay, I'm taking a fair amount of color. Here it's going into pink. I'll wash off my brush so I can take some of that yellow off, go into my pink, bring it up to my blue. Because if the blue and the yellow mix, you're going to get green. Okay, you want to wash it off in between colors. Pink and yellow mix well together, they create an orange, and pink and blue mix well together, they create purple. But if the blue touches the yellow, you're going to get green. You don't really want a green sky. Okay, so now I'm going to take some more of that pink, and I want to I'm going to do this stroke. This is now the wet on wet technique. We did our gradient. We're going to do the wet on wet technique. And what that does is it creates a really nice blurred kind of soft stroke effect. And I'm just going to take my pink and I'm going to start adding some, like I have my brush on its side a bit and I'm doing these kind of flicking motions for these wispy clouds. And they're coming down kind of at an angle. Okay, and I might do a couple from the other side, not too many. And I'm really like lifting off my brush when I flick it, so it's a nice kind of point almost, okay? And then I might just do some clouds down here, like so, okay? Then I'm going to wash and dry off my brush. I'm going to take some of that blue and I'm going to start doing some blue into the pink. And that's going to mix and create some purple clouds. Like that. And again, from the corner, kind of on an angle. You want the sky to appear like this dome almost. And if it's like just side to side straight, it's going to look really flat. This gives the sky a bit more movement, okay? Now, if your paper has started to dry, you might see that you're getting some marks. Try and just wet it up again. Not a lot of water, just a little bit. This is like the toughest part. It's just not having a lot of water on your brush so it doesn't push away. So I'm just going like into the colors without much water and blending it out. Okay, I might even just take a little bit of, which blue is it? Blue and pink to create some purple. Nice dark, and start swooping it in there. Okay, now I don't want to do too much. It is so much fun and you can keep going and then overwork your painting, which I've done many times. So try and stop when you can. I'm going to take a little bit of that purple and bring it down because I do want some of those darker clouds. Just kind of skimming it across. But because our paper is wet and we're doing this wet on wet technique for the clouds, you're getting this like blurry, kind of out of focus, soft stroke. Now, if the paper was completely bone dry, it would be very like stark edges, like very detailed edges. This gives softness to your background. I'm just going to take some of these dark clouds just right towards the horizon. It's kind of like this purpley, kind of grayish color now because it's mixing with the yellow, like so. And you should get a nice sunset. And now I'm going to stop. I say stop and then I don't stop. Now it's starting to dry here a bit. See how I'm getting more of a line there? I'm just going to be very, very soft with it. I don't want to put any more water on my brush, and I'm just going to just kind of smooth it out just a little bit. Okay, it's when you add that water, like if I dipped my brush in my water right now and I put it across the sky, the water would repel that color and create this, what we call a bloom. So just be aware. But also, you know, you can also try it and see how that looks so you know if you like that look or if you don't. And now my paper is still, it's not really, really wet. It's still a bit damp. If I want to add more color to this, I just have to be careful, like I said, not to add too much more water to my brush. So I'm just going to have a little bit of paint, tap some water off on my brush, and just add a little bit of the pink in there. If I wanted to add more, you just got to make sure you don't have a lot of water because that's going to repel it. Okay, now I'm going to stop because I would definitely ruin it by now. Okay, and I'm going to create the grass. Okay, so now we're going to do the same kind of thing like we did here with the gradient, just the single color with some green. Pick a green that has a little bit more of a yellow into it. Because this is a sunset, it's not going to be like a bright green daylight grass. It's going to have a little bit of moodiness to it. It's going to have a bit of a muted tone. So like an olive color would look really nice. I'm going to use my olive green and show you. And now you can wet the background first if you'd like, how we did with the other gradient. I'll show you what it looks like when you don't. So see, when you do wet on dry, it's just like a straight line. There's no blending or anything. Now you can do it like this, and all you have to do is just quickly start moving it down. I would add some water, blend it down. I always say to wet the background first if you're doing this. It just helps it blend a lot better. You won't get as many lines, so it's up to you. But what we're going to be doing, if you look at a lot of landscapes, the closer an object is to you, or the grass or the ground, the darker it's going to be. The further away it is, the more out of focus and lighter it's going to be. So even though this is dark to light right now, we're going to change that up. So you want to start with like a light wash of your green, and then we're going to slowly start to make it darker. So now I'm going to grab more. Also, look at that effect that you get with wet on wet, which is perfect for grass. I'm going to have to redo that, but because I want to do a gradient first, but just keep that in mind. You find out really cool things when you just play around. Okay, so I'm going to make it darker down here, and we're going to slowly start to move it up. I'm also going to use a darker color green closer to the foreground. And actually what I might do, because it's a sunset, I want a little bit of sun on the grass there. So you can add a little bit of yellow to the grass that's closest to the horizon line, or even a little bit of orange, just a tiny bit. And it just looks a little bit more sun-kissed in the background. Okay. I like a little bit of orange. I find it just adds a bit of warmth. If you mix too much orange with green, it turns kind of brown. This just makes the olive green look a little bit warmer. Okay, and then we're going to make it darker as we move down. Okay, that's still too light. Now, if you want to create some hills, you could always do that too. You can do like a little hill here, which would still be darker in the foreground. Okay, you could do little hills like that if you want. You don't have to. I think I'm just going to do my gradient. Wash off my brush because too much green is coming to the background. Wash off, dry on your paper towel, and then blend it. I'm going to try and lift some of this color. It's a bit too dark there. Just try and blend it out. Now I'm going to start adding some darker green down here because I want it to be a bit more of a stark contrast. So I'm going to grab some of my olive green dark. Okay. And I'm just going to slowly move it up just a little bit. And I like to move it to the sides a bit. So it's kind of like there's sun coming through the center here of the field, and it's a little bit darker on the sides. So I'll just take a little bit of that dark green and just kind of have it kind of frame the sides a bit. Now, the last thing, I'm just doing it a little bit more here. We're going to add some trees after and stuff like that too. The last technique I want to show you with this, similar to the lifting technique, actually not really, I don't know what I'm saying, is we're going to be dropping some water to create some white flecks in the field. Now, hold on. I just realized I want to actually make this a bit darker down here. So I'm going to grab an even darker green in the foreground, just a little bit, just to frame it a little bit more. Okay, so I'm grabbing some Perylene Green that I have here, just in the foreground, like that. And it just helps create more depth. That's what we're doing with this gradient of the lightness back in the background and then darker as we come down. It helps create depth. And I added a little bit to the frame around the top here, just because I feel like it adds a bit more wholeness. I don't know. So just a little bit up there. Okay. Oops. Like that. Okay. Now what I'm going to show you, I'm going to wash off my brush, dry it. I'm going to take a smaller brush, like a size 4 here. I'm going to take some clean-ish water, wet up my brush, not too much water where it's dripping everywhere. So I'll just run it against the side of my jar, maybe tap it a little bit here. What I'm going to do is tap my brush so some flecks of water hit the grass here, and it will actually kind of resemble some flowers or like dandelion fluff almost, which we're going to add later in another video. So just a bit. Okay, make sure your sky's dry first because you don't really want those flecks up there, but just a little bit. Or you can even take just a little bit on your brush and just drop it a little bit in there. And those will be spaces for some flowers later on. Just a little bit. And then you got to know when to stop, which again, I have a hard time. And that's it. Okay, so that is our first video of creating backgrounds. We have our kind of water sky version here, and then we have a bit more intricate of a sky and the grass here. And in our next video, we are going to move on to some layering, some wet on dry, and yeah, continue with these paintings. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching my video. I really hope you liked it and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on all my other platforms for tons more content. I'll see you guys for part 2 on Wednesday.